The hospital ceiling looked depressingly familiar. The white panels I'd been looking at for the third day were beginning to irritate me with their sterile emptiness. My name is Randall Cobblehill, and 3 days ago, my heart decided to remind me that I was 67 years old. The attack happened right in the middle of a meeting. I was just explaining to the managers of my chain of Fresh Choice stores why we needed to rethink our vegetable supply chain when a sharp pain twisted my chest. I remember the surprised faces of the staff and the ceiling of the ambulance, and then those white panels overhead. Dr. Fellows, a full woman with short red hair and a perpetually tired look, told me I was extremely lucky. Another half hour, Mr. Cobblehill, and we wouldn't be talking to you. She didn't know I'd experienced worse heart attacks, just not physical ones. 4 years ago, I buried my Irene. 37 years together, and suddenly there was an empty half of the bed. That was a real heart attack, one that my heart never fully recovered from. The machine next to the bed beeped and beeped, measuring the beats of my heart. I looked out the window at the frowning St. Albans sky and thought about how it had all started. 43 years ago, all I had was my father's old car and some money I'd saved up working at a local warehouse. I bought a tiny little store on the corner of Oak Street and River Road where I sold groceries. "Fresh Choice," the sign proudly proclaimed, scrawled in my hand. Irene was just out of college at the time and working as an elementary school teacher. She supported my crazy idea, even though her parents told her she was messing with a loser. "He's too easy for you, honey," her mother said. Maybe she was right, but Irene believed in me. For the first 5 years, I worked 18 hours a day. I stood behind the counter myself, negotiated with suppliers myself, scrubbed the floors myself in the evenings. Irene came to help after school. We were barely making ends meet, but gradually things started to pick up. By the 10th year, we had 3 stores. By the 20th, we had 12 in and around St. Albans. Today, Fresh Choice has 32 stores and a wholesale warehouse. Not a lot by the standards of the supergiants, but for a man who started with a small shop, it's an empire. "Mr. Cobblehill, how are you feeling today?" Nurse Janine entered the room with a clipboard in hand. Her neat blue uniform is always ironed to a squeak. Janine has 2 children and a trucker husband. That's what I've learned in these 3 days. "Like a man who's 70, even though he's only 67, I replied, trying to sit up higher on the cushions. "Hold still. I'll adjust." Janine pressed a button on the remote, and the top of the bed rose up. "Your son didn't come in today?" I grinned. "No, Christopher's probably too busy. Business, you know." Janine nodded understandingly and busied herself with checking the IV. She'd probably heard enough family stories from patients to not ask too many questions. "Christopher, my only son, my pride and my disappointment. He's 34, and all his life he's been trying to prove to me, what exactly? That he's better than me? That he's not like me? It's hard to say. He was born when Fresh Choice was just starting to grow. A little wrinkled lump with a high-pitched scream in my eyes. Irene said he looked like me, but I saw her in him, the same stubbornly compressed lips, the same gaze as if assessing the world. By the time Christopher turned 10, we could afford a big house in a nice neighborhood and a private school. He was growing up with things I could only dream of at his age. Maybe that was the problem. "Daddy, why are you always at work?" he would ask when I missed his school plays or sporting events. I explained that I was building a future for all of us. But could a kid really understand that? Janine finished with her treatments and left the room. I was alone with my thoughts and the beeping of the heart monitor. Christopher grew up to be a smart kid. He graduated from university with a degree in business administration. I was proud of him and hoped he would join the family business, bring fresh ideas to the table. But he had other plans. Grocery shopping? "Really, Dad? In the 21st century? He laughed when I offered him a place in the company. "It's all so primitive. Today, money is made on the internet, in cryptocurrencies, in startups." He got a job at some tech company, but he only lasted a year there. Then there was another firm, then another. Nowhere he stayed for long. They don't appreciate my ideas. The boss is an idiot. The company's going in the wrong direction. The excuses were always different. And then there was Violet. They'd met at some digital marketing conference. Tall, slender, with perfect blonde hair and a mind as sharp as a blade. She worked as a social media consultant, a profession I still don't fully understand. Christopher fell in love instantly. 6 months later, they were married, a small ceremony at which I felt like an extra. Violet looked at me with barely concealed contempt, an old man stuck in the past with his grocery stores. After the wedding, Christopher suddenly took an interest in the family business. "You know, Dad, I was thinking we could modernize Fresh Choice," he said over the dinner he and Violet deigned to attend. "Grocery delivery through an app, personalized offers based on shopping habits, maybe even a blockchain to track deliveries." I wasn't against technology. We had already implemented state-of-the-art cash register systems in accounting programs. But I knew my customers. They were mostly middle-aged and older people who valued quality products and personal interaction with salespeople. "Christopher, let's start small. Show me the business plan, the payback calculations," I suggested. He rolled his eyes. "You and your calculations. We need to move fast, Dad. In today's world, he who doesn't take risks loses." Violet backed him up. "Randall, you don't understand how the market works today. We could attract investors, scale the business tenfold in a couple years. And who's going to control the quality of the products? Who's going to maintain relationships with local farmers? Who will make sure the staff is courteous to customers?" I asked. "Algorithms, quality control systems, training," Violet brushed it off. "All of that can be automated." I didn't relent then. Didn't let my life's work be turned into just another faceless corporation. And since then, my relationship with Christopher had grown even colder. The phone on the bedside table vibrated. I reached for it, wincing at the pain in my chest. A new message. From Violet. Strange. She almost never texted me directly. "Your business is sold, dumb old man. Bye." I reread the message 3 times, not believing my eyes. What kind of nonsense was this? How could they sell the business? Christopher had no such authority. With trembling fingers, I opened social media. Christopher's page was usually filled with pictures of business meetings, fancy restaurants, and expensive gadgets. But the latest post made me go cold. A picture of him and Violet's home, a spacious living room filled with people with glasses of champagne. Christopher is in the center, raising a toast. The caption, "A new chapter in our lives. Goodbye routine, hello freedom." In the next picture, Violet was hugging some man in an expensive suit. I recognized him. Patrick Lynch, owner of a rival supermarket chain, Food Max. The comments were full of congratulations. "Congratulations on a successful deal. Way to go, guys. Now you're free. Yay! The old man's finally out of the business." The last comment was left by Violet. "Thanks, everyone. Celebrating all night tonight. Christopher has waited so long for this moment." I put the phone away and closed my eyes. The heart monitor beeped more frequently, reacting to my increased heart rate. How could they have done this? How had they technically managed to pull off the sale? And then I remembered. 3 months ago, Christopher had come to my office with some paperwork, something to do with restructuring the company to optimize taxes. I signed trusting my son and the company's lawyers. Was this really preparation for a sale? Had they been planning this for months? Outside the window, the rain began to fall. The drops drummed on the glass as if mocking my naivete. 32 stores, a warehouse, hundreds of employees. My life's work, it all belonged to Patrick Lynch, the man who had spent years trying to squeeze me out of the market. And my son and his wife were celebrating while I lay here with tubes sticking out of my veins. They didn't even bother to come and tell me in person. Just a message. "Your business is sold, dumb old man. Bye." 43 years in business. 43 years of early rises and late returns home. 43 years of negotiating with suppliers, hiring staff, solving problems, developing and growing. All of it wiped out with one message. I squeezed the phone so hard my knuckles turned white, but then I forced myself to relax. My heart was pounding in my chest, reminding me of the recent attack. No, I wasn't going to let them finish me off. Not now, because there was something they didn't know, something very important. I pressed the nurse call button. Janine appeared almost instantly. "Mr. Cobblehill? Are you feeling ill?" "No, Janine. I need my cell phone, a real phone, not this toy." I pointed to the smartphone. "There should be a leather-bound notebook in my bag. Bring it over, please." "But Dr. Fellows asked you not to worry and—" "Janine," I looked her straight in the eye. This is a matter of life and death. My business." She hesitated, but then nodded and walked out. She returned a few minutes later with a shabby notebook I'd kept since the days when smartphones seemed like science fiction. "Thank you, Janine. And one more favor. Can I have a phone?" "The landline that's here in the ward." She pulled the machine closer to the bed. "Just please don't overexert yourself." When she came out, I opened my notebook to the letter P and found a number I hadn't dialed in years. Hubert Pratt, my old friend and lawyer, with whom we'd started back in the days when the first fresh choice was just a dream. Christopher and Violet could have forged documents. They could have tricked Patrick Lynch. They could have thrown a party celebrating my business death. But they didn't know about the agreement Hubert and I made 10 years ago. An agreement that made any sale of fresh choice without my personal presence and Hubert's signature legally null and void. I picked up the phone and started dialing. The party at my son's house would soon turn into a very different event. Dr. Fellows came in the morning and took a long look at my vitals, frowning and making notes in her clipboard. "Is something wrong?" I asked, watching her focused face. "Your blood pressure spiked last night. The monitor also picked up an abnormal heart rhythm." She looked at me over her glasses. "Is something agitating you, Mr. Cobblehill?" I averted my eyes. "Nothing in particular. Just a little family trouble. Mr. Cobblehill, you suffered a serious heart attack. At your age and with your medical history, any stress can be fatal. I strongly advise you to avoid excitement." Avoid excitement. That's easy to say. I wonder how she'd react if her life's work was stolen by her own children. "I'll try, doctor," I lied. When she left, the room fell back into silence, broken only by the beeping of instruments and distant hospital noises. I looked out the window at the gray sky of St. Albans and thought about Irene. Irene always said I worked too hard. "Randall, life passes you by," she'd repeat when I'd come home past midnight after missing another family dinner or Christopher's school event. "I'm doing this for you," I'd reply, "so you can have the best of everything." "We don't need all the best, Randy." She was the only one calling me that. "We need you. Here and now, not sometime later, when the business is finally successful enough." But I wasn't listening. It seemed to me just a little more. One more store, one more successful deal, and then I could relax, spend more time with my family, catch up on my reading. Irene got sick all of a sudden. At first it was just the usual fatigue, headaches. She put it down to age and the pressure of school. Then it got worse. When she finally went to the doctor, it was too late. A tumor in her brain, aggressive, inoperable. They gave her 6 months. She lived 4. I remember every minute of those 4 months. How her hair fell out in shreds after chemo. How she lost weight, becoming a shadow of her old self. The pain that even the strongest painkillers only dulled but didn't completely eliminate. I closed a few stores, delegated the management of others, spent all my time with her, but it was too late. It was too late. In recent weeks, she was often unconscious. But sometimes she'd come to, and we'd talk. Or rather, she'd talk and I'd listen, holding her hand, so cold and thin it felt like it might break with the slightest pressure. "Take care of Christopher, Randy," she pleaded. "He's going to have a hard time without me." "We'll manage," I promised, swallowing back tears. "Don't be so hard on him. He's different, not like you. He's sensitive." "I know," I nodded. "I'll be there for him. I promise." She died quietly in her sleep. Just didn't wake up in the morning. I was holding her hand when I realized she was no longer breathing. Christopher was 30 at the time. The funeral was a blur. I don't remember that day well. The black suits, the muffled voices, the condolences from people, many of whom I barely knew. Christopher didn't cry. He stood beside me, pale and detached, as if what was happening had nothing to do with him. After the funeral, I'd expected that grief would somehow bring us closer together, that our shared loss would make us forget our past differences. But that's not what happened. "It's your fault," Christopher said when we returned to the empty house. His voice was ringing with restrained rage. "She's been asking you to spend more time with her for years, and you kept working and working. Christopher, don't what? Tell the truth? If you'd been around, you would have noticed sooner that something was wrong with her. Maybe she could have been saved. The doctors said that even if they had diagnosed it earlier." "Doctors?" He pounded his fist on the wall. You didn't even take her to the Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins. You just put your trust in the local emergency room. You should have saved money on your fucking stores. It wasn't fair. I consulted with the best specialists across the country. They all said the same thing. The tumor was too aggressive, too deep. But Christopher needed a culprit, and I was the perfect target. After that fight, he moved out of the house and almost stopped talking to me. He called occasionally and even less often, usually when he needed money. I gave it to him without asking what it was for. It was my way of atoning for the guilt I didn't really feel, but that he was so insistent on putting on me. And then he met Violet. I first saw her at a fundraiser for a local hospital. Christopher had shown up unexpectedly with her, a tall blonde with chiseled features and cold blue eyes. She worked for some sort of digital social media marketing company. Dad, this is Violet Price, Christopher introduced her. Violet, this is my father, Randall Cobblehill. She smiled and held out her hand to shake. Her palm was dry and cool as a snake's. Heard a lot about you, Mr. Cobblehill. Christopher has told me so much. Hopefully not just the bad stuff, I joked. Oh, not at all. Her smile grew wider, but her eyes remained cold. He admires your perseverance. I immediately sensed the falseness in her words. I saw her appraisingly inspect my suit, wristwatch, handmade Oxfords, anything that could indicate my wealth. Christopher looked at her with an adoration I hadn't seen in his eyes since I was a child. She looked at him with the calculating interest of a predator choosing its prey. After that meeting, they were inseparable. Violet quickly moved in with him, and soon Christopher announced their engagement. Aren't you in a bit of a hurry? I asked cautiously when he broke the news to me. You've only known each other for 3 months. How long does it take, Dad? 10 years? 20? I love her. She loves me. What else matters? I wanted to say, she doesn't love you, son. She loves the prospect of being the wife of a successful business heir. But I didn't. Christopher wouldn't listen anyway. The wedding was modest, just 50 guests at the country club. Violet had insisted that the ceremony be modern and minimalist. No pageantry, no tradition. She walked down the aisle alone. Her parents, she said, couldn't make it because of pressing business. Later I learned that they had long been divorced and hardly communicated with their daughter. At the wedding reception, Violet sat next to me. Christopher was busy talking to some of his friends at the other end of the table. So, Mr. Cobblehill, she began, sipping her champagne, tell me about Fresh Choice. Christopher mentioned that the company is rather successful. We're doing pretty well, I replied evasively. You're being modest, she smiled. I did a little research. 32 stores, turnover of about 30 million a year, net profit of about 5 or 6 million. Impressive for a family business. I was surprised at her knowledge. Such figures were not published in the public domain. You have good sources of information, Mrs. Cobblehill. Oh, I have many talents, she leaned closer. You know, I think I could help you modernize your business. My experience in digital marketing would come in handy. Fresh Choice has virtually no presence on social media, and it's a huge potential market. Maybe, I sipped my whiskey, but our customers are old-school people. They value quality products and face-to-face interaction over Instagram photos of food. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Old customers leave sooner or later, Mr. Cobblehill, and new ones look for brands online. Without an updated business model, Fresh Choice may not be competitive in the coming years. Thanks for the advice, I rose. But perhaps on your honeymoon, you should be thinking about nicer things than a grocery store marketing strategy. She smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. Of course. We'll still have time to talk about it. After the wedding, they flew to the Maldives for 2 weeks, and when they returned, Christopher suddenly took an interest in the family business. He started showing up at the main office, getting to know the managers, studying the reports. I was surprised but pleased. Maybe getting married had really changed him. Maybe he had finally grown up and was ready to take responsibility. Dad, I've been thinking about the future of Fresh Choice, he said over dinner one day. We need to expand, go online, offer delivery. We've already tried delivery in 2 neighborhoods, I reminded him. The profitability was low. Because you were doing it wrong, we need to create an app, build a system based on artificial intelligence that will analyze purchases and suggest products. And how much would it cost to develop such an app? From 300,000. But it's an investment in the future. I shook my head. Christopher, you have to understand the specifics of our business. We operate on a small margin. 300,000 is the profit of 3 stores in a year. Exactly. That's too small a profit. We need to scale up, attract investors, and lose control of the company. No, Christopher. Fresh Choice is a family business. I want it to stay that way. He jumped up from the table. You're just afraid of change, as always. The next day he came in with a new proposal. What if you hand over the management of one store to me, the most problematic one? I'll show you that my methods work. It seemed like a reasonable compromise. I allocated him a store on the outskirts, which had been operating at a loss for the past 2 years due to a competitor's supermarket opening nearby. Christopher took on the job with enthusiasm. He hired designers, renovated the interior, and started advertising on social media. Violet helped him by creating colorful posts about rethinking the concept of the grocery store. After 3 months, it became clear that the experiment had failed. Revenue hadn't increased, and expenses had doubled by 1.5 times. The locals didn't appreciate the fancy renovations and fancy merchandising. They wanted the same things they always wanted: quality products at reasonable prices and familiar faces behind the counter. They just need time to get used to it, Christopher insisted. We just have to put in a little more, and the results will show up. Christopher, we've already invested over 100,000. The store is making a loss. It's not working. Because you're not giving me full discretion. If I could apply my approach to the entire chain. No, I replied firmly. I'm not going to let you experiment with something that's been decades in the making. After that conversation, he didn't show up at the office or my house for several weeks. When he finally did, it was with a whole new proposal. Dad, I want a stake in the company. Not management, just a share. As an heir. Why would you want that now, I asked. You know in my will, everything goes to you. I need the money now. Violet and I are thinking about buying a house. I can give you money for a down payment. No, he shook his head. I don't want handouts. I want what's rightfully mine, as part of the family. I thought about his words for a long time. Maybe this would actually make him feel more responsible for the family business. In the end, I agreed to give him 15% of the company. My lawyer Hubert Pratt insisted on strict conditions. Christopher would receive dividends, but he had no say in the management and could not sell his share to third parties without my consent. Christopher didn't seem particularly happy about these restrictions, but accepted the terms. The next day, he and Violet bought a house, not just a house, but a real estate in an upscale neighborhood of St. Albans, the cost of which far exceeded what they could afford on dividends from the 15% of Fresh Choice. Where did you get the money for a house like that? I asked when Christopher invited me to a housewarming party. Mortgage, Dad, he replied nonchalantly. Banks give good terms when they know you're a co-owner of a successful business. The amount of monthly payments must be huge. Don't worry, we have everything under control. But I was worried, and I was right. 6 months later, Christopher came to me again. Dad, I need another 10% of the company. What happened to the dividends from your 15%? They go to mortgage payments and house maintenance. We need more. Christopher, a company is not an ATM. If you need extra money, get a job. A job? He looked at me with genuine surprise. I'm the heir to Fresh Choice. Why should I work for someone when I have a family business? Because that business has to be earned, not just inherited, I replied, feeling my anger boiling over. I started with one store and worked 18 hours a day. I learned every aspect of this business from the inside out, and you want to have it all ready-made, just because you were born my son. Don't start that story about how hard you worked. His voice trailed off into a shout. I've heard it 1,000,000 times. You were building your goddamn empire while Mom and I waited at home for you. And now you're berating me for not wanting to repeat your mistakes? Irene never considered our business a mistake, I said quietly. She was proud of what we had built. She just accepted it, and it killed her. We were back to the same conversation again, to the same mutual accusations. Nothing had changed. I didn't give him an extra cut. Instead, I offered him a marketing director position with a good salary. Marketing? He snorted contemptuously. I'm supposed to sit around in an office coming up with advertising slogans for tomatoes and cucumbers? It's an important job, Christopher, and it affects the entire company. No thanks, he rose, getting ready to leave. You know, Dad, one day you're going to regret not giving me what I asked for. I saw something new in his eyes, something dangerous. Not just resentment or disappointment, but real, angry determination. In the months that followed, Christopher and Violet began living large. A new sports car, designer clothes, exotic vacations. Photos of their lavish life filled social media. Where they got the money from remained a mystery. The dividends from 15% of the company were clearly not enough for such profligacy. Violet had some kind of job at a digital agency, but it hardly brought in enough income. Anxiety kept me on my toes. I asked Hubert to see if Christopher had taken out any large loans against his stake in the company. No such information turned up. But something was wrong. About a year ago, Christopher suddenly took an interest in running the company. He started showing up regularly at the main office, attending management meetings, reviewing financial documents. I was pleased with this change and allowed him to participate in all aspects of the business, hoping that he was finally mature enough to take responsibility. A few times he brought me documents to sign, usually something related to tax optimization or restructuring the company. I signed trusting my son and the company's lawyers. And 3 months ago, he proposed to expand his powers as a minority shareholder. I need to be able to make decisions in emergencies, he explained. What if something happens to you? Businesses can't stop because of legal technicalities. That sounded reasonable. Besides, I really wasn't getting any younger. Perhaps it was time to start a gradual handover of management. I signed a new set of documents, having consulted with Hubert beforehand. My old friend and lawyer warned me, Randall, these documents give Christopher more power than you realize. I would advise limiting his authority to more specific scenarios, but I brushed off the cautions. He's my son, Hubert. I must trust him. Hubert shook his head. I've known Christopher since he was a boy, Randall. He's changed, and not for the better. It's all because of Irene's death. He needs time. It's been 4 years, Randall. And it's not just Christopher. That wife of his, Violet, she has too much influence over him. I knew Hubert was right. I saw how Violet was manipulating Christopher, feeding his resentment toward me. But what could I do? He was a grown man who had made his own choices, and now lying in my hospital room, looking up at the gray sky of St. Albans, I realized I'd been wrong all along. Christopher had never been interested in the family business. He was only interested in the money he could squeeze out of it. And Violet. She saw him as the perfect means of access to the Cobble Hill fortune. Hubert was right. I should have been more careful. But can a father not trust his own son? My thoughts were interrupted by a phone call. Hubert finally called back. Randall? Jesus, I just heard about your heart attack. How are you? Alive, as you can see, though some would prefer otherwise. What are you talking about? Christopher and Violet sold Fresh Choice to Patrick Lynch. A second silence, then a sharp exhale. What? When? How were they able to do that? Apparently those papers I signed 3 months ago. Damn it, Randall. I warned you. I know. But this is no time for recriminations. They threw a party celebrating the sale. Violet wrote to me, called me a dumb old man. Hubert was silent for a moment. Then he spoke in a calmer, more businesslike tone. All right, let's get to the bottom of this. Do you remember our secret agreement from 10 years ago? Of course. Any sale of Fresh Choice without my personal presence and your signature is legally null and void. Exactly. Only you, me, and the notary who notarized it knew about it. Christopher couldn't have known about it. So the deal is null and void? Technically, yes, but we need to act fast before the money goes offshore. Do you know where Christopher and Violet are now? According to social media, they're having a huge party at their house, celebrating getting rid of me and getting my money. Okay, Hubert's voice became hard. Here's what we'll do. Mr. Cobblehill, are you sure you want to check out? Your condition hasn't fully stabilized yet. Dr. Fellows looked at me with professional concern as she flipped through my chart on her clipboard. Absolutely sure, doctor. I was already buttoning my shirt, struggling to do up the buttons because of my trembling fingers. I have urgent business to attend to. What business could be more important than your health? You suffered a serious heart attack just 4 days ago. The recommended hospital stay is at least a week. I looked her straight in the eye. Dr. Fellows, if I stay here for another 3 days, I may have nowhere else to go. I have serious problems that require my personal presence. She sighed, admitting defeat. I can't hold you by force, but you must sign a waiver of medical supervision and promise that you'll follow all the prescriptions. Take your medications, avoid stress, and give up alcohol and heavy food. I nodded, even though we both realized that avoiding stress in my situation was impossible. Dealing with the betrayal of my own son and the theft of my life's work. What could be more stressful? The doctor handed me a waiver form, and I signed it without hesitation. Then she handed out prescriptions for a whole bunch of medications and detailed instructions on how to take them. And call a cab, please. You can't drive for the next 2 weeks. I already called my driver, I lied. I didn't have a driver, but there was Hubert Pratt, who promised to pick me up. When Dr. Fellows finally left, I finished getting dressed. The suit I had worn the day of the heart attack now hung on me like a sack. I had lost several pounds in 4 days. Looking in the small mirror over the sink, I barely recognized my reflection. A pale, gaunt face with sunken eyes and new wrinkles that didn't seem to exist a week ago. Nurse Janine helped me pack my things and led me to the exit of the ward. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Cobblehill," she said goodbye. "And don't forget to take your medication." Hubert's car, a black Lincoln with tinted windows, was already waiting at the hospital entrance. My old friend stood beside me, tall and lean, impeccably dressed in a dark blue suit as always. Despite his 69 years, he retained an almost military bearing and a sharp mind. "You look lousy," he said in lieu of a greeting as he helped me into the car. "Hello to you, too." I leaned back in the leather seat with relief. Hubert got behind the wheel and drove out of the hospital parking lot. "Where are we going?" "To your house?" "No," I shook my head. "To the Fresh Choice office first. I want to see for myself what they've done." "Randall, are you sure?" "It could be unpleasant. That's exactly why I have to see for myself, to believe what happened." Hubert nodded and turned in the direction of downtown St. Albans, where my, now former, company was headquartered. On the way, he recounted what he had managed to find out over the past 2 days. The deal has indeed gone through. Patrick Lynch bought Fresh Choice for $24 million, significantly below market value, by the way. How were they able to pull that off legally? Christopher used those documents you signed 3 months ago. He was authorized to act on your behalf in the event of your incapacity. The heart attack and hospitalization gave him a formal basis. But I wasn't incapacitated. I was conscious, able to make decisions. They falsified medical records, Randall. According to the paperwork, you were in a coma. I felt my anger boil over. So not only did they steal my business, but they also falsified medical records. That's a felony. "One of many they've committed," Hubert nodded grimly. "I've already contacted the prosecutor's office and explained the situation. They are prepared to investigate the matter." "What about our secret agreement?" "It's still legally enforceable. Any sale of Fresh Choice without your personal presence, and my signature is null and void. But they obviously didn't know it existed." "And the money? 24 million. That's where the bad news is," Hubert frowned. 18 million has already been transferred to offshore accounts. We can block the remaining 6, but it will take an international lawsuit to recover the principal. I rested my head back on the headrest and closed my eyes. $18 million, practically stolen by my own son. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to the office building where Fresh Choice had been headquartered for the past 15 years. The 10-story glass parallel piped in the St. Albans business district wasn't the most impressive skyscraper, but I was proud that my company occupied the top 3 floors. The security guard in the lobby, an older African-American man named Gerald who had worked here since day one, looked at me in surprise. "Mr. Cobblehill, I thought you were in the hospital." "Already checked out, Gerald." "How are you?" he faltered, clearly feeling uncomfortable. Fine, sir, but are you aware of the change?" "I know, Gerald. That's exactly why I'm here. Will you let me through?" "Of course, sir," he faltered even more. "But I have to alert FoodMax security. Those are the new rules." FoodMax? So Patrick Lynch hadn't just bought my company, he'd already started rebranding it. "Do what you have to do, Gerald." I headed for the elevators, Hubert following behind me. As I walked up to the 8th floor where my office was located, I prepared myself for the worst, and I was not mistaken. Already in the elevator lobby, we were greeted by Foodmax's head of security, a stout young man in a black suit with a headset in his ear. "Mr. Cobblehill, I have been informed of your arrival." He spoke with contrived politeness. "Unfortunately, I can't allow you to proceed any further. This is private property." "This is my property." I felt my blood pressure begin to rise, but took a deep breath, remembering Dr. Fellow's warnings. "Not anymore, sir. Fresh Choice was acquired by Foodmax 2 days ago. I have direct orders from Mr. Lynch to keep you out of the building." Hubert stepped in, pulling some papers out of his briefcase. "And we have legal documents proving the invalidity of this transaction. If you obstruct us, it could be considered obstruction of justice." The guard was clearly confused. "Yeah, I should contact my superiors." "Contact them," Hubert shrugged. "In the meantime, we'll go through." We walked around him and headed toward the glass doors that used to house the Fresh Choice office. The sign with my company's logo, a stylized image of a fruit basket, had already been removed. In its place was a temporary sign with the Foodmax logo, a faceless combination of red and blue. Inside the office, chaos reigned. People in movers' uniforms were carrying out computers and boxes of documents. Some of my former coworkers sat at their desks with a detached look, while others were packing up personal belongings. My secretary, Dorothy, a woman who had worked with me for over 20 years, jumped up from her seat when she saw me. "Mr. Cobblehill!" My goodness! She rushed toward me, but stopped, hesitant to hug me, seeing my sickly appearance. "We all thought you were in a coma." "As you can see, Dorothy, rumors of my coma were greatly exaggerated." I tried to smile. "What's going on here?" "They're laying off everyone who's worked at Fresh Choice for more than 5 years. They say they need fresh blood." Her voice shook. "And the rest of us are getting a 20% pay cut." "Who's in charge now?" "Is Patrick Lynch here?" "No, Mr. Lynch was just yesterday. His assistant, Mr. Graham, is in charge today. He's in formerly your office." "Thank you, Dorothy." I headed toward my office, located in the far corner of the office. The doors, previously always open to employees, were now tightly closed. Without knocking, I stepped inside. At my desk sat a young man in his 30s, with a fashionable haircut and wearing an expensive but garish suit. When he saw me, he jumped up. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" "I'm Randall Cobblehill, founder of Fresh Choice, and I believe you are Mr. Graham." He straightened, trying to sound confident. "Yes, Jeffrey Graham, Executive Director of Integration for Foodmax." "Mr. Cobblehill, you have no right to be here. This property now belongs to our company." "I'm afraid you're mistaken," Hubert interjected, entering the office next to me. "The deal to sell Fresh Choice is legally null and void. Mr. Cobblehill never gave his consent to that sale." "But we have all the necessary documents signed by his son, Christopher Cobblehill, acting under a power of attorney." Graham pointed to a folder lying on the table. "A power of attorney obtained fraudulently and used illegally." Hubert pulled another folder from his briefcase. "And we have documents proving that any sale of Fresh Choice without Randall Cobblehill's personal presence and my signature as his lawyer is null and void. That document takes precedence over any power of attorney." Graham's face went pale. "Yeah, I must contact Mr. Lynch." "By all means contact him," I nodded. "And tell him that if he doesn't stop this integration farce immediately, in addition to a civil suit to invalidate the deal, we'll be filing a criminal suit for grand fraud. And that's jail time, Mr. Graham." The young man frantically grabbed the phone and walked out of the office, giving us a startled look. As soon as the door closed behind him, I sank heavily into my chair, feeling suddenly weak. "Are you okay?" Hubert asked worriedly. "No," I answered honestly, "but I'll be fine." My office, the place where I'd spent thousands of hours making the decisions that determined the fate of Fresh Choice, had already begun to be remodeled. Pictures of my family and company awards had been stripped from the walls. In their place, only light-colored rectangles on faded wallpaper remained. My personal belongings were stacked in cardboard boxes against the wall. My computer and phone had already been replaced with new ones with the Foodmax logo. "They acted fast," Hubert remarked as he looked around the office. "Like they were afraid you'd make it back in time." Of course they were afraid. They knew the deal was illegal. I opened the desk drawers. Empty. Well, it's time to pay a visit to the main organizers of this spectacle. Are you sure you can handle it? Why don't you go home first? Get some rest. No, Hubert. I want to see their faces tonight, while they celebrate their victory. Let's go. We walked out of the office under the stares of the shocked employees. Dorothy ran up to me, clutching some kind of photograph in her hands. Mr. Cobblehill, I wanted to save this for you. She held out a framed picture to me, a picture of us together with the entire staff, taken for the company's 20th anniversary. They were going to throw it all away. I took the photo, feeling a lump come up to my throat. Thanks, Dorothy. And don't worry about your work. I'll fix it. We know you'll fix it, Mr. Cobblehill. She smiled through her tears. We're all on your side. Descending in the elevator, I pondered my next steps. Hubert, you said you've already contacted the DA's office? Yes, my former student is now an assistant district attorney. He promised to issue an arrest warrant for Christopher and Violet as soon as he gets all the evidence he needs. Good. And have you talked to Patrick Lynch? Tried to, but he's not answering his cell phone. I think he and Christopher have it all planned out ahead of time. Of course they did. The question is whether Lynch knew about our secret agreement. I doubt it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone along with the deal. Lynch is certainly an unscrupulous businessman, but he's not an idiot. He wouldn't have risked $24 million. We left the building and got into Hubert's car. Where to now? He asked. To Christopher and Violet's. They bought a house in Highland Park. Do you know where that is? Sure. The most expensive neighborhood in town. As we drove, I checked Violet's social media. As I expected, she was actively posting pictures from the party, which was apparently in full swing. Goodbye, boring life. Hello, freedom and adventure. Dash read the caption to a photo of Violet and Christopher raising champagne glasses in the middle of a lavishly decorated living room filled with guests. Other photos showed a crowd of well-dressed people dancing and having fun. Patrick Lynch was there too, smiling, satisfied, with a glass in his hand. They're celebrating while people who've worked for the company for decades are thrown out on the street, I muttered, feeling the anger boil over again. Take it easy, Randall. Hubert threw me a concerned look. Remember your heart. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. You're right. We need a cool head. Half an hour later, we pulled up to Christopher and Violet's house, an imposing Georgian-style mansion with columns and an impeccably manicured garden. The street was lined with the guests' expensive cars. From the open windows came loud music and sounds of merriment. Well, the party's in full swing, Hubert remarked as he parked in front of the house. Yeah, what's the plan? I pulled out my phone and dialed the number of my former student-turned-assistant district attorney that Hubert had mentioned. The plan is simple. We're going to put an end to this theft fest. 15 minutes later, 2 police cars without sirens pulled up to the house. Out of them stepped 4 uniformed officers and a man in a strict suit. The assistant district attorney Elliot Baird I had just talked to on the phone. Mr. Cobblehill, Mr. Pratt, he said hello as he approached our car. We have a search and arrest warrant for Christopher and Violet Cobblehill on charges of fraud and forgery. Thanks for your promptness, Elliot, Hubert nodded. Another surprise, Elliot pointed to an approaching car. I've invited the other interested party as well. Patrick Lynch, a heavy-set man in his 60s with a red face and thinning gray hair, stepped out of the car. When he saw me, he froze in place, his face pale. Cobblehill? But you're supposed to be in a coma? I smiled weakly. I'm afraid you've been duped, Patrick. As with so many other things. Elliot walked over to Lynch. Mr. Lynch, I assume you already know that the deal to acquire Fresh Choice is legally null and void? What? Lynch looked genuinely stunned. But I have all the documents signed by Christopher Cobblehill, acting under a false power of attorney. Hubert finished for him. Mr. Lynch, there is a legal agreement that any sale of Fresh Choice without the personal presence of Randall Cobblehill and the signature of his lawyer, which is me, is null and void. This agreement takes precedence over any powers of attorney. Lynch's face turned crimson with anger. Those little crooks. Did they know about this? Did they deliberately drag me into an illegal transaction? I'm afraid so, Elliot nodded. And now that you're here, we can settle things in a civilized manner. I suppose you'll want your money back? $24 million, Lynch growled. I want every last dime of it back. Unfortunately, 18 million has already been transferred to offshore accounts, Hubert informed him. But we can freeze the remaining 6 million still in local banks. And of course, we'll pursue the rest through the international courts. Those bastards! Lynch gasped with rage. I'm coming with you. I want to see their faces when you arrest them. We, along with the police officers, Hubert, Elliot, and Lynch, walked to the front door of the mansion. Elliot rang the bell. A minute later, Violet opened the door, dazzling in a tight silver dress, a glass of champagne in her hand. When she saw us, she froze, and her face, usually skillfully controlled, contorted with shock. Randall, her voice trailed off. But how? Surprised, dear sister-in-law, I smiled, savoring the moment. I hope we're not late for the party? Christopher appeared behind her back, attracted by the unusual pause in the doorway. When he saw me, Patrick Lynch, and the police officers, he turned so pale I was afraid he'd have a heart attack before I did. Dad? You're not in the hospital. As you can see, son, I'm alive and well, and very, very interested in finding out how my business came to be sold without my knowledge. Elliot took a step forward. Christopher Cobblehill, Violet Cobblehill, you are under arrest on charges of fraud, forgery of documents, and grand larceny. Christopher and Violet's living room was crowded with people. The music, the loud laughter, the clinking of glasses, all of it blended into a single noise stream that instantly subsided as we entered the room. The faces of the guests, heated with alcohol and merriment, turned toward us one by one, expressing surprise and then alarm at the sight of the policeman. I stood in the doorway, leaning on the cane Hubert had thoughtfully brought with him from the car. Despite my weakness after the hospital, I tried to keep upright. Christopher and Violet froze in front of us like startled deer in the headlights. What's going on? Violet was the first to find her voice. She tried to put a look of bewilderment on her face, but poorly concealed fear gave her away. Why are the police here? Elliot Baird, the assistant district attorney, stepped forward, holding an official document. Miss Violet Cobblehill, Mr. Christopher Cobblehill, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of grand fraud, forgery of documents, and theft of corporate assets. Christopher turned even whiter, if that was even possible. This is some kind of mistake, he muttered. I have all the necessary powers of attorney. Forged powers of attorney, Hubert interrupted him, stepping forward and standing beside me. Powers of attorney fraudulently obtained and invalid in the context of the sale of the company. The guests began to chatter quietly, some furtively pulling out their phones, apparently filming what was happening. Patrick Lynch, who was standing behind us, pushed his way forward, his face contorted with rage. You little crooks! He jabbed a finger in Christopher's direction. You knew the deal was illegal. You deliberately deceived me. Christopher took a step back, raising his hands in a protective gesture. Patrick, calm down. It's all legal. I had power of attorney. Which isn't worth the paper it's printed on, Lynch roared. You stole 24 million from me. One of the officers took a step toward Christopher. Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back. Wait. Christopher looked around desperately, as if seeking support from the guests. But everyone averted their eyes. Violet, tell them. Violet, however, had already turned her attention to me. Her initial shock had been replaced by cold calculation. Randall, she said quietly, let's discuss this like civilized people. I'm sure we can find a solution that will suit everyone. I grinned. I'm afraid, Violet, the moment for civilized discussion passed when you texted me, your business is sold, you stupid old man. Bye. Several of the guests awed. Violet gritted her teeth, her socialite mask beginning to crack, exposing her real face, cold and calculating. It was a joke, she said through a strained smile. Just a silly joke. Of course we weren't going to. Didn't intend what? Hubert interrupted her. Weren't going to forge medical documents to declare Randall incompetent? Weren't going to illegally sell the company? You weren't going to move the money offshore? Because you did all of those things. Christopher, who was already being handcuffed by the officers, suddenly blurted out. It was all her idea. Violet planned the whole thing. I was just doing what she said. Violet turned sharply toward him, her eyes narrowing. Shut up, you idiot, she hissed. Don't make things worse. But it was too late. Another officer headed toward Violet with handcuffs. She backed away, putting her hands out in front of her. "Don't touch me. Do you know who I am? My father is a partner in the law firm of Price and Hollander." "Actually," I said calmly, "your father is a school bus driver in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and your mother works as a cashier at a supermarket. You changed your last name and made up a new bio when you moved to St. Albans." Violet froze, her face contorted with rage. You've been following me?" "Of course," I shrugged. "Did you think I'd trust part of my company to my son without checking to see who he married?" She rushed toward me, but the officer intercepted her. "You're going to pay for this, old man," Violet shouted as she was handcuffed. "You're going to regret crossing me." The guests began to quietly make their way toward the exit, trying to remain unnoticed in the drama. Some cast sympathetic glances at us. Others were clearly enjoying the show. The policeman led Christopher and Violet out of the room, reading them their rights. Elliot Baird stayed with us. "Another team of officers has already accessed their computers and documents," he said. "We need to find information about the funds transferred." Patrick Lynch shifted nervously from foot to foot. "What about my money?" "The $24 million I paid for Fresh Choice." Hubert turned to him. "Mr. Lynch, as I explained, we can immediately freeze the remaining $6 million still in the local banks. As for the $18 million transferred offshore, it will require international legal action to recover it." Lynch's face turned purple. $18 million? They managed to transfer $18 million? That's robbery. "I'm afraid so," Hubert nodded. "But don't worry, we'll do our best to get your money back. And of course, the deal to sell Fresh Choice is canceled." "Canceled?" Lynch looked at us in disbelief. "After all I've put into the integration? I've already hired new employees, started rebranding." "I'm afraid those are your expenses, Mr. Lynch," Hubert replied calmly. "You should have done more due diligence on the legal integrity of the deal before closing it." Lynch opened his mouth, clearly about to object, but then waved his hand and sank into the nearest chair, wrapping his arms around his head. God, what a nightmare. The board of directors is going to destroy me. I walked over to him and put a hand on his shoulder. "Patrick, listen. I realize you've been hurt too, but you had to know something was wrong when Christopher offered you Fresh Choice for $24 million. That's way below market value." Lynch raised tired eyes at me. "I thought I'd just successfully capitalized on your illness. That your son didn't realize the real value of the business? And you decided to cheat him?" I raised an eyebrow. "Business is business, Cobble Hill," he muttered without much conviction. I shook my head and turned to Hubert. "I need to sit down. I feel faint." Hubert immediately led me over to the couch in the corner of the living room, where Christopher and Violet's guests had recently been partying. I sank heavily onto the soft cushions, feeling my heart pounding. Despite the satisfaction of seeing justice done, I was physically exhausted. After all, I had suffered a heart attack 4 days ago. "Do you need to go to the hospital?" Hubert asked worriedly. "No, just give me a minute." Elliot walked over to us with a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Cobblehill, I just received information from the technical experts. They found some interesting documents on Violet's computer. It looks like they've been planning this scam for at least 6 months." 6 months? I shook my head. "So the whole time Christopher was feigning interest in the company." "It was preparation for the theft," Hubert finished for me. "They were studying the business structure, looking for legal loopholes." Elliot nodded. "And they found them. Or rather, they thought they had. The documents you signed 3 months ago did indeed authorize Christopher to act on your behalf in the event of your incapacity. But they didn't know about your secret agreement with Mr. Pratt." "Tell me about that agreement," Lynch asked, approaching us. "How does it work?" Hubert pulled a folder from his briefcase and extracted a document written on heavy, watermarked paper. 10 years ago, Randall and I drew up this agreement. According to it, any transaction involving the sale of Fresh Choice or a controlling interest in the company requires Randall's personal presence and my signature as his attorney. No power of attorney, even the broadest, can circumvent that requirement. "And this agreement is legally binding?" Lynch asked doubtfully. "Absolutely," nodded Hubert. "It was duly authenticated and registered. It's just that information about it wasn't publicly available. Only Randall, myself, and the notary who notarized it knew about it. Lynch shook his head. If I had known about it, I never would have agreed to the deal. That's why the information was confidential, I said. It was a precautionary measure in case someone tried to take over the company bypassing me. Your own son, for example, Lynch muttered. I sighed. I didn't think it would ever be needed against Christopher. But the last few years, he's changed. Elliot caught our attention again. Mr. Cobblehill, I just received information from the judge. He's issued a warrant to freeze all of Christopher and Violet Cobblehill's accounts and to request information from international financial organizations about the transferred funds. How quickly can the money be recovered? Lynch asked hopefully. It's hard to say, Elliot spread his hands. Offshore jurisdictions aren't particularly cooperative in cases like this. Could take months, even years. Lynch groaned and sank back into his chair. At that moment, a police officer entered the room. Mr. Baird, we found something interesting in the office upstairs. We all followed the officer up the wide staircase to the second floor. Christopher's office was a spacious room with panoramic windows overlooking the backyard. The walls were hung with diplomas and certificates. Some I was sure were fake. On a large mahogany desk lay an open file folder of documents. Another officer, already waiting for us there, pointed to it. Here's a plan to sell off Fresh Choice's real estate and assets piece by piece. It looks like they were going to sell off everything individually after the deal with Mr. Lynch was finalized. Lynch grabbed the documents and began to quickly look through them. His face grew increasingly gloomy. They never intended to integrate Fresh Choice into Foodmax. They planned to sell off all the assets to competitors and leave me with an empty shell of a company. I picked up one of the documents. It was a list of potential buyers for different stores in the chain with suggested prices. The total amount from such a sale was about $40 million, almost double what Lynch had paid for the entire business. What a grand deception, Hubert shook his head. Not only did they steal the company from Randall, but they were going to cheat you, Patrick. Lynch slumped in his chair, his face ash gray. I would have lost everything. Not just $24 million, but my reputation. The Foodmax board of directors would have fired me in disgrace. Elliot took the documents and scrutinized them carefully. This is serious evidence. With this, Christopher and Violet could face up to 20 years in prison for grand fraud. 20 years? I shook my head. Despite everything that had happened, the thought of my only son spending 2 decades behind bars hurt. Hubert must have caught my mood. Randall, you shouldn't feel guilty. It's their choice, their decisions. I know, I sighed, but he's still my son. Elliot coughed delicately. Mr. Cobblehill, there's something else you need to see. He pointed to Christopher's computer, where a file of email correspondence was open on the screen. I stepped closer and started reading. It was correspondence between Christopher and some doctor at the hospital where I was laid up. All set? Christopher asked. Yes, the medical records have been changed. According to the paperwork, your father is in a coma and is incapacitated. Excellent. The fee will be transferred as agreed. I felt the blood drain from my face. They bribed the doctor to falsify my medical records. That explains why Dr. Fellows was so surprised when you decided to check out, Hubert remarked. According to her records, you should have been unconscious. Elliot made a note. We'll look into this doctor. He's going to be an accessory to fraud. I sank back in my chair, feeling suddenly tired. The magnitude of Christopher and Violet's betrayal was staggering. They hadn't just taken advantage of my illness. They'd actively tried to make it worse by falsifying medical records, perhaps even hoping I wouldn't survive. I need to get some air, I said, rising. Hubert supported me under his elbow, and we stepped out onto the spacious balcony adjacent to the office. Downstairs in the courtyard, the tables were still set with the remnants of holiday treats. Garlands of light bulbs softly illuminated the empty dance floor. The festivities were over before they had even begun. How are you? Hubert asked, looking at me carefully. To be honest, I don't know. I leaned on the balcony railing. I knew Christopher and I had a complicated relationship, but I never thought he was capable of something like this. Stealing the company, forging documents, maybe even wanting me dead. I'm not sure they wanted you dead, Hubert objected softly. More likely they just took advantage of a convenient opportunity. I don't know which is worse, I shook my head. Either way, I lost a son. really lost him. We were silent for a moment, looking out at St. Albans at night, its lights twinkling in the distance. "What now?" Hubert asked at last. "Now," I straightened up. Dash dash. Now I go back to fresh choice, fixing whatever Lynch managed to do with his integration. I'm bringing back the employees I fired, and I'm going back to business as usual. "And Christopher and Violet?" I sighed. "Let the law decide their fate. I won't interfere, neither to help nor to hurt." At that moment, Elliot came out onto the balcony. "Mr. Cobblehill, the officers have finished their preliminary examination. We found some more important documents that prove fraudulent intent. This will seriously strengthen the case against your son and his wife." I nodded. "Thank you, Elliot. I appreciate your work." "You're welcome. I've always told Mr. Pratt's students that the law exists to protect justice. I'm glad I can attest to that in practice." Elliot went back into the study, leaving us alone again. "You know, Hubert," I said, looking up at the starry sky, 10 years ago, when we drew up that agreement, I thought I was protecting myself from outside threats, from competitors, from raiders. I never thought it would be needed to protect against my own son." Hubert put a hand on my shoulder. "Life is full of ironies, Randall, but what matters now is that you kept the company. Fresh Choice will remain your legacy, regardless of what Christopher did." "Legacy?" I repeated the word bitterly. "You know, I always thought I was building a company for Christopher. That one day I'd hand over my life's work to him, and he'd carry on what Irene and I started. Now that's not gonna happen, and I don't know who I'm working for now." "For myself," Hubert answered simply. "For Irene. For the hundreds of people who work at Fresh Choice and depend on you. For the thousands of customers who appreciate what you've created. Isn't that enough?" I smiled, feeling something akin to peacefulness for the first time in days. "You're right, old friend. It is more than enough." We returned to the office where Elliot and the officers were finishing gathering evidence. Patrick Lynch was sitting in the corner talking on the phone, apparently reporting back to the Food Max board of directors on the failure of the deal. "We're heading back to the Fresh Choice headquarters," I said to Elliot. "We need to begin the process of regaining control of the company." "Of course, Mr. Cobblehill. I'll send some of the officers there with a formal notice to invalidate the deal. That will help avoid resistance from Lynch's men." I looked at Lynch, who had just finished talking, and looked utterly mortified. "Patrick," I turned to him, "I realize you're also a victim in this situation. We're going to do everything we can to help you get your money back." He looked up at me with tired eyes. "You know, Cobblehill, in 30 years in the business, I've made hundreds of deals. Some were fair, some not so fair. But never have I ever fallen for such blatant deception. First time for everything, Patrick," I smiled weakly. "Come on, we have to go." We walked out of Christopher and Violet's mansion, leaving the police officers to finish their work. There were reporters waiting for us outside. Apparently, some of the party guests had alerted the press to the dramatic events. "Mr. Cobblehill, is it true that your son tried to sell your company while you were in the hospital?" "Mr. Cobblehill, how do you feel about your own son being arrested?" "Mr. Lynch, will you comment on the failure of the acquisition of Fresh Choice?" Hubert determinedly threaded his way through the crowd of reporters, helping me to my car. "No comment at this stage. There will be an official statement tomorrow." We got into the car and touched off, leaving behind the camera flashes and shouted questions. "Tomorrow's going to be a tough day," Hubert remarked as we pulled onto the main road. "The press will pounce like vultures. Are you ready for it?" "I'll have to be ready." I leaned back in the seat, feeling dead tired. Fresh Choice needs its founder, especially now. "And you need rest," Hubert said firmly. "I'll take you home. Everything else can wait until morning." I didn't argue. Today had been too eventful for a man who had suffered a heart attack 4 days ago. But despite the physical fatigue, I felt strangely relieved. I now knew exactly who my enemies were, and that was better than living in ignorance. Christopher and Violet had committed an unforgivable betrayal. They weren't just trying to steal the company, they were trying to steal my legacy, my life's work. And while the thought of my only son ending up in prison hurt, I knew I couldn't forgive him. Some lines can't be crossed, even if you're family, especially if you're family. The morning was overcast but not raining. I sat in my office at the Fresh Choice headquarters, looking at the fresh newspaper spread out on my desk. The headline screamed scandal. "Son tried to steal father's business, family betrayal at Fresh Choice, 24 million fraud. Some of the photos captured the moment of Christopher and Violet's arrest. They were led out of the house in handcuffs, stone-faced and downcast. Dorothy brought me a cup of herbal tea. Coffee was now off limits thanks to the heart attack. "How are you feeling today, Mr. Cobblehill?" she asked with genuine concern. "Better than yesterday," I smiled weakly. "How is the restoration of order going?" "Most of the staff have returned to their desks." Dorothy took a seat across from me. "Mr. Pratt is holding a meeting with the managers, explaining the legal situation. Lynch's men left the building as early as last night. His assistant, Graham, looked absolutely crushed." I nodded. The events of last night had unfolded rapidly. After the dramatic reveal at Christopher and Violet's house, Hubert and I had returned to the Fresh Choice office, where the police were already waiting with an official notice of nullity. Lynch called his assistant, Graham, and he uncomplainingly agreed to escort all the Food Max employees out of the building. "What about the stores?" "Did Lynch have time to implement his rebranding?" I asked. "Only 3 out of 32. They've had time to replace signage and have started rearranging merchandise. But the managers have already been instructed to put everything back the way it was." "Good," I sipped my tea. "What about the suppliers?" "Most contacts have been reestablished. Some expressed concern about the stability of the company, but have calmed down since your return." I nodded, feeling satisfied. The business I'd been building for over 40 years had endured. It had endured betrayal, a takeover attempt, and stayed afloat. There was a certain poetic justice in that. Hubert entered the office holding a folder of documents. He looked tired but pleased. "The staff is shocked but happy to have you back," he said, sitting down next to Dorothy. "A lot of people have been asking about Christopher and Violet." "News travels fast." "What should they say?" Dorothy asked. "The truth," I answered, "that they tried to illegally sell the company using my hospital stay and are now facing the consequences of their actions." Dorothy nodded and left the office, leaving Hubert and I alone. "I have news from Elliot," he said, opening a folder. "Christopher and Violet have been formally charged. Grand fraud, forgery of documents, falsification of medical records, and illegal transfer of funds overseas. The court denied bail for fear they might try to flee the country." "How much are they facing?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "On aggregate, up to 25 years. But it's likely to be less if they make a deal with the prosecutor's office." I nodded, feeling a strange emptiness inside. Despite all the anger and frustration, the thought of my only son spending a significant portion of his life in prison didn't bring joy. But I saw no other way. Some actions cannot be forgiven or forgotten. "What about Lynch's money?" I asked. "6 million in local accounts frozen. Offshore is more complicated. Elliot says it will take international court orders to freeze and recover the funds. That's going to take time." "And how's Lynch himself?" Hubert grinned. "Angry and humiliated. The Food Max board is meeting today to discuss his situation. There's a chance he'll be fired." "Too bad," I shook my head. Despite our competition, he didn't deserve to be cheated like that. "Business is business," Hubert shrugged, echoing Lynch's own words. The phone on my desk rang. I picked it up and heard Dorothy's voice. "Mr. Cobblehill, Mrs. Cobblehill, Christopher's mother, wants to see you." I froze. Evelyn, my ex-wife and Christopher's mother, whom we had divorced before our son was born. We hadn't spoken in years. "Send her in," I said after a pause. The door opened and Evelyn walked in, still a slender woman in her 60s, with neatly styled gray hair and pinched lips. Her navy blue suit looked expensive and austere, like herself. "Randall," she nodded, not holding out her hand to shake. "Evelyn," I gestured for her to sit down. "It's been a while." "At Irene's funeral," she remarked dryly. "And now this." Hubert rose. "I'll leave you two alone." "No need, Hubert," Evelyn stopped him. "What I'm about to say applies to legal matters as well." She turned to me, her eyes, the same blue as Christopher's, were cold and determined. "I just came from our son, Randall. He's utterly desperate. That woman, Violet, has completely subjugated him. She manipulated him, forced him to go against you. He's the victim, not the perpetrator." I sighed. Typical Evelyn, always defending Christopher, always making excuses for him. "Christopher is a grown man, Evelyn. He's made his own choices. Under the influence of this adventurous." Her voice rose. She hunted for money, exploited his resentment toward you, his vulnerability after Irene's death. Perhaps, I shrugged, but that doesn't justify forging documents, stealing, and fraud. He knew what he was doing. He was confused, as she insisted. Please, Randall, you can withdraw the charges. This is your company, your son. The case has already been referred to the DA's office, Evelyn. It's not just my decision. Besides, there's also Patrick Lynch, who had $24 million stolen from him. He's entitled to justice, too. She pitched forward. Are you really going to let our only son end up in prison? Are you willing to destroy his life? He destroyed his own life when he decided to steal my company. I tried to speak calmly, but I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise. Where were you, Evelyn, when he was planning all this? Where was your motherly guidance back then? Don't you dare accuse me, she almost shouted. I was always there for him, unlike you. You were too busy with your stores, your business. Even with Irene, you spent less time than you did with Fresh Choice. The pain at the mention of Irene was sharp and unexpected. I clenched my fists, trying to contain my anger. Leave Irene out of this, I said quietly. It has nothing to do with the case. It does, Evelyn jumped up. This whole thing started when she died. Christopher blamed you, and not without reason. If you had spent more time with her, perhaps you would have noticed the symptoms sooner. Enough. I rose as well, ignoring Hubert's warning look. Irene was sick with an inoperable brain tumor. No amount of early detection would have saved her. The doctors were unequivocal on that point, and I was with her every day of her illness, every minute. Evelyn looked at me defiantly, but then something in her gaze changed. It was as if she deflated, slumped back in her chair. I just want to help our son, she said more quietly. What should I do, Randall? I sat down too, feeling suddenly tired. Hire him a good lawyer. Convince him to cooperate with the DA's office. Maybe they'll commute his sentence. And for God's sake, help him realize what he's done. Without that realization, he'll never change. She nodded silently, picked up her purse, and stood up. I'll do everything in my power, but I'll never forgive you for not stopping it, Randall. And I'll never forgive him for betraying me, I replied. So we're even. Evelyn left the study, leaving behind a heavy silence. Hubert coughed. Are you okay? No, I answered honestly, but I will be. The rest of the day was spent regaining control of the company. I held a general staff meeting, explained the situation, assured everyone that their jobs were safe, and Fresh Choice would continue business as usual. Met with key suppliers, confirmed all contracts, gave a short interview on local TV to reassure the public and customers. By the evening, I was exhausted but satisfied with the work I had done. The company had survived the crisis and was getting back on track. Hubert came into my office with a bottle of mineral water and sandwiches. You haven't had lunch, he remarked, and it's almost 8 o'clock at night. Thank you. I took the sandwich and was surprised to find that I was indeed hungry. What's the news? Patrick Lynch called. The Foodmax board of directors decided not to fire him, but demoted him. He's now just one of the vice presidents, not the CEO. The outcome could have been worse, I remarked. He's asked to meet with you. Wants to discuss possible ways to get his money back. I nodded. Set it up for tomorrow. Elliot also called. Christopher asked to meet with you. Alone. I froze before I could bring the sandwich to my mouth. Why? Didn't say. Just that it's very important. I set the food aside, my appetite suddenly gone. So what's your advice? Hubert shrugged. Legally, it's not necessary. All the evidence against him is irrefutable. But from a human point of view, perhaps you should listen to him. After all, he is your son. Was my son, I corrected grimly. Randall, I've known you for almost 50 years. You can say whatever you want, but I can see that you care about him, despite everything he's done. I sighed. Arrange a meeting. For tomorrow after Lynch. Hubert nodded and walked out, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I went to the window and stared out at the evening St. Albans. The lights of the city lit up one by one, creating a bizarre pattern in the thickening twilight. What could Christopher possibly want to say to me? Apologize? To ask for leniency, as Evelyn had suggested? Or maybe try to justify himself? Blame it on Violet? None of it mattered. Trust was irrevocably broken. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. The phone on the desk rang. I picked it up. Mr. Cobblehill, it was Dorothy. There's a Mr. and Mrs. Abbott to see you. I frowned, not recognizing the last name. Who? Violet's parents. They just got in from Tulsa. I paused, surprised. Send them in. A moment later, two not-so-young men entered my office. The man, tall, with a weathered face and calloused hands, looked exhausted from the long journey. The woman, full, with tired eyes and gray in her dark hair, held him under her arm as if seeking support. Mr. Cobblehill? The man asked uncertainly. I'm Liam Abbott, and this is my wife, Marge. We are Violet's parents. I motioned for them to sit down. What can I do for you? They looked at each other as if deciding who would speak. Finally, Mrs. Abbott began. Mr. Cobblehill, we want to apologize for our daughter. What she did, it's terrible, unforgivable. We haven't had contact with Violet in almost 10 years, Mr. Abbott added. She left Tulsa right after high school, changed her last name to Price, made up a new biography for herself. We weren't rich or prestigious enough for her ambitions. I nodded, beginning to understand. She told Christopher that her father was a partner in a large law firm. Mr. Abbott grinned bitterly. I've been a school bus driver for 25 years, and Marge works as a cashier at a supermarket. Not the kind of background Violet would want to be proud of. We learned of her arrest from the news, Mrs. Abbott continued, and her eyes filled with tears. We couldn't believe it. Our little girl, how could she? I felt a sudden sympathy for these ordinary people who were caught up in a scandal because of the actions of the daughter they had been estranged from years before. I'm sorry, I said sincerely. Mr. Abbott straightened up. We want to help. If Violet transferred the money into some accounts, perhaps we could convince her to return it. I shook my head. I'm afraid it's not that simple. The money has been transferred offshore into accounts registered to shell companies. The process of getting it back will be long and complicated. We want to try anyway, Mrs. Abbott insisted. She's our daughter, no matter what. And if there's a chance to undo even a fraction of what she's done, I looked at them. Simple, honest people, willing to help a daughter who had turned her back on them, and felt a strange envy. They still had hope, a belief that Violet could change. I had no such hope left for Christopher. I'll put you in touch with the prosecutor's office, I said. If Violet agrees to cooperate, it might help her and the situation as a whole. They nodded gratefully and stood up. As they left, Mr. Abbott stopped in the doorway. Mr. Cobblehill, one more thing. We saw Christopher at the station when we came to visit Violet. He looked lost, and he was asking about you. I remained silent, not knowing what to say. Mr. Abbott nodded understandingly and walked out, leaving me alone with my heavy thoughts. In the evening, I returned to my empty house, a large Victorian-style building that had once been full of life when Irene and I and little Christopher had lived there. Now the silence was pressing on my ears. I went into the living room, poured myself a glass of water, whiskey was now off limits, and sat in a chair looking at the pictures on the mantelpiece. Irene with little Christopher in her arms, the three of us on a picnic. Christopher in his college graduation gown, happy moments that now seemed to belong to another life, another family. The phone rang, breaking the silence. I reluctantly answered it. Randall, it's Hubert. Elliot just called. There's some news. What kind of news? Violet has agreed to cooperate with the DA's office. She revealed where the money was hidden and testified against Christopher, claiming the whole idea belonged to him. I closed my eyes. Of course she would do that, trying to benefit herself at Christopher's expense. What does Christopher say? Denies her side of the story, says she planned the whole thing and he was just following her lead. Classic situation, each blaming the other. I didn't know who to believe, and frankly, I didn't care anymore. My heart was too scarred to care about the details of their betrayal. What about the money, I asked? If Violet's information is correct, most of it can be recovered. The process will take time, but Lynch should get his $24 million. Good, I felt a little relieved. At least Patrick wouldn't be left at a loss. Randall, Hubert's voice became softer. Are you sure you want to meet with Christopher tomorrow? After he tries to blame it on Violet? I'm sure, I answered firmly. I want to look him in the eye. I want to hear his side of the story. Not to forgive, but to understand. I understand, Hubert said quietly. Well, I'll see you tomorrow. Get some rest, friend. I hung up the phone and continued looking at the pictures. Thoughts were jumbling in my head. Images of the past, the happy family, smiling Irene, little Christopher, were mixed with recent events. The arrest, the stern faces of the police, the shocked party guests leaving Christopher and Violet's house. It took me a long time to fall asleep that night. When sleep finally came, I dreamed of Irene. She was standing in our garden, among the blooming roses and looking at me with a sad smile. "What shall I do?" I asked her in my dream. "What you think is right," she answered. "You've always been a fair man, Randy. Don't cheat yourself now." I awoke with the first rays of the sun, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what to do. The meeting with Patrick Lynch went better than I expected. We sat in my office drinking coffee, him, and herbal tea, me, discussing what had happened with unexpected understanding. Violet gave away the location of the accounts, I informed him. The DA's office has already started the refund process. It'll take time, but you'll get every last dime. Lynch nodded, his usually red face looking pale and drained. The events of the last few days had aged him 10 years. You know, Cobble Hill, in 30 years in business, I've run into all sorts of things. Corporate raiders, dishonest competitors, corrupt officials. But I never thought I'd be caught up in a family scandal. "I didn't expect this either," I replied, "especially from your own son." Lynch sipped his coffee. "The board of directors demoted me to vice president. Could have been a worse outcome, considering I almost lost 24 million of the company on a questionable deal. I'm sorry." I actually sympathized with him. "Don't be," he waved his hand. "Maybe it's for the best. Less responsibility, more time for family. My wife never liked me working 70 hours a week." I shuddered involuntarily, remembering Irene saying almost the exact same thing to me. "So what do you plan to do with Fresh Choice now?" Lynch asked. "Keep working," I shrugged. "What else is there to do? You're 67, Cobble Hill. You just suffered a heart attack. Maybe it's time to think about taking a well-deserved vacation." "And leave the company to whom?" I grinned bitterly. "My only heir is sitting in jail awaiting trial for trying to steal my business." Lynch was quiet for a moment, twirling a cup in his hands. "You know, I'm still interested in buying Fresh Choice. Of course, it's going to be more difficult now, given my position at Food Max, but—" "No, Patrick," I shook my head. "Fresh Choice isn't for sale, at least not right now." He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Well, the offer still stands. If you change your mind, give me a call." After Lynch left, I had some time before my meeting with Christopher. I decided to walk around the office to check on the progress of getting things back to normal. The employees were smiling at me, happy to see me back, but I could see the anxiety in their eyes and the questions they didn't dare to ask out loud. What would happen next? How will this story affect the company? What would happen to their jobs? In the marketing department, I met Nate Hawthorne, a young professional who had joined us about 3 years ago. Tall, thin, with intelligent eyes and a calm smile, he was one of the most promising employees. Nate was sitting at his computer, working on a presentation of a new advertising campaign. "Mr. Cobble Hill," he stood up, noticing me. "It's good to see you in good health." "Thanks, Nate," I smiled. What are you working on?" "On the concept for the Fresh Start campaign. Thought that after all these events, the company needs to update its image, show customers that we're staying true to our principles, but ready to move forward." I looked at his computer screen with interest. The presentation was concise but informative. Nate was proposing not just an advertising campaign, but a comprehensive overhaul of the visual style, including a redesign of the logo that kept the recognizable elements but looked more modern. The project also included ideas for modernizing the stores and incorporating digital technology. Not a radical overturning of the business model, as Christopher and Violet wanted, but a thoughtful, evolutionary development. "Impressive," I said sincerely. "You've done a lot of work." "It's just a draft," Nate replied modestly. "I was planning on presenting it at the next department meeting. But if you're interested, I can tell you more about it right now." "By all means, tell me." "But not here. Come by my office this afternoon," I suggested. "I have one more important meeting, and then I'm completely at your disposal." Nate brightened. Of course, Mr. Cobblehill. Thank you for the opportunity. Returning to my office, I found Hubert there, looking over some paperwork. Ready to meet Christopher? He asked without raising his head. As ready as I can be. I sat down at the desk. What kind of papers? The plea agreement the DA's office is offering Christopher and Violet. If they sign, they face 5 to 7 years in prison instead of the potential 25, plus full restitution to Lynch. And if they refuse, then the case goes to trial with full charges and maximum terms. I nodded, mulling over that information. 5 to 7 years in prison. My son, behind bars for that length of time. The thought made my heart heavy despite everything he'd done. There was a knock at the door. Dorothy peered into the office. Mr. Cobblehill, the officers have brought your son in. Send him in. I straightened up, preparing myself for a difficult conversation. Christopher entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. He was in prison garb, with handcuffs on his wrists. His usually neatly styled hair was in disarray, his face stubble on his face. He looked haggard and broken. Can we remove the handcuffs? I asked the officers. We've been instructed not to, one of them replied. I'll take responsibility, I insisted. Please. The officer hesitated but then nodded and removed Christopher's handcuffs. We'll be waiting outside the door. When they walked out, a heavy silence hung in the office. Christopher stood with his eyes downcast, hesitant to look at me. Sit down, I said, pointing to the chair across from me. He sat down, still avoiding my gaze. Hubert rose. I'll leave you 2 alone. When the door closed behind him, Christopher finally looked up. Thank you for agreeing to meet. His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. I waited silently for him to continue. Yeah, I don't know where to start. He rubbed his wrists nervously, free from the handcuffs. What I did, there's no excuses. Then why this meeting? I asked in an even voice. I wanted to see you. To apologize even though I know it's not enough. Not enough, I confirmed. You didn't just trick me, Christopher. You've been planning this for months. Studied the company, looked for loopholes, forged documents. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a carefully thought-out plan. I know, he lowered his head. It all started as talk, fantasies. Violet kept saying that you'd never give me real power in the company, that you thought I wasn't worthy. And gradually I began to believe her. Don't put the blame on Violet, I said sharply. You're a grown man. You made your choice. I'm not shifting it. He looked up at me, and I saw tears in them. It's my fault, completely, and I'm ready to be punished. I was silent, studying his face. There was something of the little Christopher I remembered in it, a scared boy confessing to a misdemeanor. But now the misdemeanor wasn't a broken window or a ruined toy, but treason and grand larceny. The DA's office is offering a deal, I finally said. 5 to 7 years in prison instead of 25. Subject to a full confession of guilt and restitution. I know, my lawyer said so. So what's your decision? I'll sign. Christopher straightened. It's only fair. I deserve to be punished. I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of relief and bitterness. Part of me was glad he was admitting his guilt. The other part of me grieved that my son would spend the best years of his life behind bars. I have another suggestion, I said, surprising even myself. The plan had formed in my head only now, though perhaps subconsciously I'd been thinking about it since the moment I decided to meet with Christopher. He raised a questioning look at me. I can have the prosecutor's office drop all charges, I said slowly, on the condition that you and Violet return all the money to Lynch, give up any claim to fresh choice, and disappear from my life, forever. Christopher looked at me wide-eyed. Would you do that after everything I've done? Not for you, I answered honestly. For Irene's sake. She'd want her son to be free, even if he doesn't deserve it. And for my own sake, I don't want Cobblehill's name tarnished by a lawsuit and jail time. And then what? He asked confusedly. Where do we go? What to do? That's not my concern, I shrugged. You're young, educated. You'll still have connections. You'll start over, in a different city, with different people. Just without me and without fresh choice. Christopher was silent for a long time, digesting my proposal. Then he said quietly, You're never going to forgive me, are you? No, I answered firmly. Some behaviors are unforgivable. You've crossed the line, and there's no turning back. He nodded as if he'd expected that answer. I agree to your offer. Thank you. I know I don't deserve it. You don't deserve it, I confirmed. But Irene does deserve it. She always believed in you, even when I doubted. Tears came to his eyes again. I miss her. Every day. Me too. It was the first moment in a long time that there was anything resembling understanding between us. I called for the officers and they led Christopher away. As he passed me, he paused for a moment, as if he wanted to hug me or at least shake my hand, but changed his mind when he saw my face. Our gazes met one last time, and I realized I would never see him again. Hubert came back into the office as soon as Christopher was taken away. Are you serious about withdrawing the charges? He asked doubtfully. Absolutely, I nodded. Contact Elliot, explain the situation. Make sure the agreement is worded correctly. A full release of the claims against the company, a full refund of all money to Lynch, and a move to another state with no right of return. And if they violate the terms, then the charges will be reinstated in full. Hubert shook his head. I didn't think you'd go for that. Neither did I admitted. But it seems the right thing to do. I don't want the shadow of Christopher and his crime hanging over Fresh Choice. The company deserves a better future. And who will provide that future? Hubert asked. Who will be your successor, if not Christopher? At that moment, there was a knock on the door. It was Nate Hawthorne, right on schedule. Come in, Nate, I called out. Meet Hubert Pratt, my old friend and the company lawyer. They exchanged handshakes, and I motioned for Nate to sit down. Tell us about your fresh start concept. For the next hour, Nate presented his project. He spoke confidently but without arrogance, answering Hubert's questions clearly and to the point. His vision for the future of Fresh Choice was both innovative and respectful of the company's traditions. He suggested gradual changes based on market analysis and customer needs rather than radical experimentation. When the presentation was over, Hubert looked impressed. Well done, young man. Thank you, sir, Nate nodded, gathering his materials. Mr. Cobblehill, if you have any suggestions or comments, I'd be happy to make adjustments. Nate, how old are you? I asked suddenly. He looked surprised. 28, sir. And how long have you been working at Fresh Choice? 3 years and 2 months, he answered with an accuracy I appreciated. And before that? Worked at a marketing agency. Before that, a part-time job at a grocery store during college. That's actually why I got interested in Fresh Choice. I had a background in retail grocery. I glanced over to Hubert, who seemed to realize what I was thinking, and nodded faintly. Nate, how would you feel about a promotion? I asked. With enthusiasm, sir, he smiled. I'm always up for a new challenge. I'm not talking about the head of marketing position, I chimed in. I'm thinking about the deputy CEO position, with the prospect of succeeding me in a few years. Nate froze, clearly stunned. Yeah, this is unexpected. For me too, I admitted. But after everything that's happened to the company in the last few days, I realized I needed a reliable successor. Someone who shares my values and vision, but will bring fresh ideas to the table. I think you'd be a good fit. It's a huge responsibility, Nate looked serious. I'm not sure I'm ready. No one is ever fully ready for that kind of responsibility, I interrupted. When I opened my first store, I was 24, and I had no idea what I was getting into. But I learned as I went along, just like you're going to learn. You'll have time to think, Hubert added, and to prepare. Randall isn't going to retire tomorrow. Nate nodded slowly. If you think me worthy of that trust, Mr. Cobblehill, I'll do my best to live up to it. That's great, I smiled. Now go home and think it over. We'll talk about the details tomorrow. When Nate left, Hubert looked at me with respect. Interesting choice. He reminds me of me when I was younger, I explained. Smart, ambitious, but without Christopher's smugness. And most importantly, he understands the essence of Fresh Choice, respects what we've built. And what will the shareholders say? The board of directors. I still own a controlling interest, I reminded him. They can voice their opinion, but the decision is mine. Besides, Nate will impress them as much as he impresses us. Hubert nodded. Well, it's a new chapter for Fresh Choice, and a happy one, I hope. After he left, I was alone in the study. Outside the window, the sun was beginning to set, coloring the St. Albans sky with red gold tones. I walked over to the desk and picked up the picture of Irene that I always kept close by. "What do you think, darling?" I asked quietly, looking at her smiling face. "Did I do the right thing?" Of course, the picture was silent, but somehow I felt Irene would have approved of my decision, both about Christopher and about Nate. The last few days had been like a roller coaster of emotions, from despair and anger to determination, and finally to a strange calm. I lost my son, but I kept the company, found a new successor in whom I saw a spark of talent and dedication. Fresh Choice will continue to live and grow even when I'm gone. It was a bittersweet victory, not the one I dreamed of when I created the business, hoping to pass it on to my son, but a victory nonetheless. And on this quiet evening, sitting in my office with Irene's picture in my hands, I felt like I could live with that result. "It's going to be okay," I whispered, addressing either Irene or myself. "It's going to be okay." It was finally dark outside the window, the lights of the city coming on one by one, creating a constellation of earthly stars. A new chapter was beginning in the story of Fresh Choice and in my life. A chapter without Christopher, without Violet, without illusions of family harmony, but with a new hope for a future I might no longer see, but would help create. I carefully placed Irene's picture on the desk, gathered my papers, and turned off the light in the office. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new tasks and new people, and I was ready to face it with an open heart, wounded but not broken.